So because training to failure or failure training is something that can be a bit risky and dangerous, it can result in overtraining and injury. Some of you out there might be asking yourself, is that something we really should be doing? All right, well, maybe. Let's talk about what the pros and cons are and the benefits and downsides of it. And this is also stuff I learned from Dr. Mike Israetel. The benefits and pros are that 1, it ensures that you've done as much as you can. It leaves no reps in the tank and thus no gains. 2, it standardizes the stimulus and fatigue magnitude. 3, it's simpler and allows for easier progress tracking. And 4, it feels hardcore, right? It makes you know that you are training to your best possible potential and, just being a general badass, right? Training as hard and brutally as possible. And lastly, it may cause more gains, especially in advanced athletes and especially temporarily when done in bursts, like at the end of your cycle of progressive overload. But there's downsides and cons as well, of course. First, research on failure training is controversial at best and shows that 2, there's no real difference in 0 or 3 RIR in beginners who can't accurately gauge it anyway. And there's little to no difference between 1 and 3 RIR in intermediates who, are better at gauging it, but not perfect, okay? So we know that it's not an exact science and is controversial at best. And then we also know that it has a bad stimulus to fatigue ratio. A set to failure will cause more stimulus, but so much more fatigue that, you maybe could have used the same amount of energy to do 2 sets of a lower RPE, which would produce less stimulus, but when doing 2 of them, you're getting way more stimulus than just 1 set done to failure, though both of those could produce similar fatigue, all right? So that is a hypothetical analogy, but it's realistic, and watch for that, okay? If it gets to the point where you have to choose between 1 set to failure or 2 sets of lower RPE, the 2 sets of lower RPE may very well be the better decision. Also, number 4, technique is breaking down during failure, right? So in many sets, those last reps are, just bad reps, right? They're sloppy. They're kind of a joke, if you see people doing a full set of that, like, that's not effective. I don't know why you're even bothering, right? So, they're not great reps. So in spite of being very hypertrophic, they're bad reps, and there's certainly a line, like I talked about before, where they're just too bad, and you might as well not be doing them, okay? And then lastly, and most importantly, the injury proclivity is higher on failure training. So there we have 5 different pros and benefits and 5 different cons and downsides, making it seem like it's kind of perfectly weighted on either side, and kind of hard to decide whether failure training is definitively good or bad. And it's because it's not, right? It's an abstract concept that is kind of a complex issue. All right, so let's talk about what the real training implications are of all of this. First, if you don't want to train to failure, you don't have to train to failure, because it will cost you a lot of energy that could be better spent elsewhere. You might end up regretting it anyway, so if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. That's fine. And you probably won't be at much of a loss of gains, if any at all. And as we know by now, the general rule is that lifting with a 7 or 8 RPE is generally best. So if you're doing that most of the time, that's good enough. You don't have to train to failure if you don't want to. But second, it does have its merits, especially in more advanced athletes or during times when a higher level of effort and intensity are necessary, such as the end of a block of progressive overload, or during a mass gaining phase, all right? Or if you have a competition coming up, okay? So when you need maximum stimulus, this is one of the best ways to get it. So it is worth doing at times in a periodized fashion if you feel that you want and or need to. So if that is the case, that brings us to training application number 3. In order to use failure training properly, start your meso with a lower RPE, 6 for beginners, 7 for intermediates, 8 for advanced, not including the deload week beforehand, and a reload week if you do one. And then as you do progressive overload, track your performance, increase load and reps and the RPE in coincidence with them each week until you reach failure. Then you may go beyond failure some of the times if you want to, then deload. But 4, don't go to failure or beyond in any exercises where you could possibly get hurt, and always take safety precautions. So don't be training to failure on barbell bench press as much as you may want to without asking for a spotter. I know that for some of you out there, it may not feel cool to have to ask for a spotter, but it is just something that you have to do. And the reward for doing so is that you get to train past failure. Your spotter can help you with force and negatives, and you get to make a gym buddy who will be able to probably help you out more in the future without it feeling as socially awkward, because at that point you know them. So always ask for a spotter, make a new gym buddy, help each other, do drop sets and forced negatives, because that is the best thing you can do at the end of your block of progressive overload when you are supposed to be raising the effort and intensity.